Blueprint of an Islamic NATO is actualizing. The whole world is telling you to focus on America-Iran war, but that's just noise. The real deal is USA and Israel is losing it. USA is gradually selling their military stake in Middle East and focusing more on Europe, and Greater Israel plan is just a joke now. The Muslim majority countries are coming together in a way that we haven't seen in last 100 years. The true signal is how Syria is now controlled by Turkey and Saudi Arabia. How in 2023 the Saudi-Iran alliance was not just a handshake but a real economic and military alliance which came together to reshape the entire Middle East. The new world order for the Middle East will be written by Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and Israel is absolutely choked. Saudi Arabia's historic maritime alliance against the Houthis with more than 10 Muslim majority countries is giving a signal. In this video, I'll break it down how major Muslim majority countries in the Middle East and around Middle East are coming together with military and economic cooperation that will rule the world for another 50 to 100 years. Step by step, I'll talk about the 7 key countries which are creating the Islamic coalition, which majority of the other smaller countries and African Muslim majority countries and South Asian Muslim majority countries will follow. So first, let's talk about Turkey. And Turkey is amazingly positioned to be one of the leaders of Muslim NATO. First, consider this. In 1995, Turkey's economic contribution to the world was less than 1%. Now it is more than 2.2%. Turkey is the only rare country who is at the same time has great ties with China, unbelievable influence in Syria and in the entire Middle East. They have S-400 from Russia. They have coalition with Pakistan for if they need nuclear bomb, they can get under the nuclear umbrella of Pakistan. And now they have amazing ties with the White House, where Donald Trump already committed them 5 F-35, which is one of the best fighter jets in the whole world. And Turkey is pursuing 40 to 100 F-35 from USA, and USA is considering it. Turkey is selling drones to more than 150 countries. In the context of Iran-America war, look at this. When American bases are destroyed in the Middle East, Turkey's military-industrial complex is in the right position to deliver the equipments, the military intelligence to the entire region for next 20 years. So that will give them a huge economic boost. Now, anyone following Turkey's currency, lira, you'll say that lira is falling like anything. Why is lira falling? Lira is falling because Turkey was economically bogged down. Turkey wasn't economically independent. They were dependent on the mega institutions of UK and USA. When your economy is tied down by UK and USA financial institutions, there's no happy exit from it. And when you try to exit the way Turkey is trying to exit, they need to pay a price, and Turkey is paying the price by accepting the fall of lira, because they can afford to absorb the fall of lira by the amount of arms they are able to sell in the globe and the regional dominance that they have right now. Just imagine it, between Russia and Ukraine's conflict that we are seeing for more than 2 years now, who is in the best position to negotiate with between Russia and Ukraine? That is Turkey. In last 30 years, if you just see a graph on how Europe's dominance in the globe is falling, both economically and militarily, and if you see how Turkey is rising their ranks within NATO, you'll understand that within next 20 years, Turkey will lead NATO's direction regarding the influence that NATO will have within the Middle East region. When Turkey joined NATO, many of the NATO members were reluctant to even sit with Turkey. But now Turkey is the key player where all the NATO members deeply respect Erdogan because they understand when Italy is going down, when Spain is not dominating, when German factories are shutting down, Turkey is rising up. They understand the direction that Turkey is going, and they also understand Turkey is in a key position to negotiate between all the major powers, China, Saudi Arabia, Africa, Russia and USA. Last year, Turkey's arms sale was more than 10 billion US dollar. And that is growing every year. And last but not the least, Turkey recently launched their first intercontinental ballistic missile. So in the context of US bases weakening in the Middle East, the future of military industrial complex of the entire Middle East is Turkey. Now let's talk about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is amazingly positioned for a massive ride. Riyadh has strategically positioned themselves to have great relation with BlackRock, Vanguard, JP Morgan, and all their bases are investing heavily in Riyadh. And for you to better understand why Riyadh will economically dominate the Middle East, you need to understand Vision 2030 very carefully. Start looking at what Saudi Arabia did from 2023 onwards. First, their $2 billion investment in Jared Kushner's affinity partner indicate that Saudi Arabia has strategically gained significant influence in the White House. Jared Kushner and Witkoff together is a significant policymaker, strategy, key stakeholder in US's influence in the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia investing $2 billion in Jared Kushner is the beginning of gaining that influence. That's a meaningful partnership between two business parties. One, Saudi Arabia and Aramco. Another is the US corporations where Jared Kushner is an important player. And then, if you look at the partnership between Saudi Arabia and BlackRock and Vanguard in the last 2 years, you will see that Saudi Arabia is opening up for Western investment in Riyadh. In 2023, Saudi Arabia did something no one was expecting, and that is before 2022 they were fighting in Yemen. Saudi Arabia and Iran was fighting in Yemen. There was a war, a brutal war, where Yemeni Houthis were supported by Iran and the general population mainly supported Saudi Arabia, and there was a bloody war. But in 2022 onwards, Saudi Arabia made meaningful economic and military ties with Iran to an extent where they agreed for cooperation. And we are seeing right now that although Iran is striking in all the US bases in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia is not going to direct war against Iran. So much so that whenever USA requested Saudi Arabia to join the war against Iran, Saudi Arabia didn't join the war against Iran. Rather, Saudi Arabia wants to increase their influence within the Iran sphere. How? Look at the recent 14-point deal that was signed between Iran and USA in Pakistan. And in the deal, there is clearly written that USA's regional allies will invest in Iran $300 billion. Who is that regional ally? Mainly Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE, all of them are planning to strategically invest in Iran for a strategic cooperation and partnership. You see, USA is gradually losing their military ground in the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia and Turkey is greatly positioned to increase their sphere of influence within the Middle East region. And Saudi Arabia doesn't want to go to direct war with Iran or anyone. Rather, Saudi Arabia wants to increase their influence. Saudi Arabia has three main challenges. So first of all, Saudi Arabia doesn't want Iran's proxies to dominate the region and create trouble. Iran's proxies are three: the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah, and Hamas in Palestine. They don't want these three proxies to dominate. Saudi Arabia wants their sphere of influence for greater economic and military cooperation in the region. So they want to cooperate with Iran, but they don't want Irani military or their proxies to dominate the region, number one. Number two is they don't want Israeli dominance. They want a free Palestine. And MBS said it again and again that Palestine issue is something that is significant and they won't compromise on the Palestinian freedom issue. So Israel's military dominance is a problem for Saudi Arabia. And number three, Saudi Arabia to have their own military dominance, they don't want the US bases all over the Middle East. Now, if you look at the Iran and USA war very carefully so far, everything that is happening, starting with the discussion in Oman, then multiple discussion in Pakistan, you will see a pattern. And the pattern is, it's not going towards a forever war. Rather, it's going towards a controlled conflict, a damage that is being controlled by the key stakeholders. What are the key stakeholders? Saudi Arabia, China, Turkey, and American corporations. What do they all want? They want business, they want profitability in the entire region. And if there are so many countries which are failed state, all of these failed states are created because they want a prosperous and a greater Israel, then that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense for all the regional partners. So the greater Israel is a delusion right now, and all of them want economic cooperation in the region. Everything that is happening between USA and Iran, you will clearly see three things that are happening. The IRGC, which is the parallel military in Iran, other than Iranian military, is being downsized. And already Hamas declared that they're going under Palestinian government. Already you can see that Hezbollah in Lebanon has been greatly downsized. All their commanders and majority of the commanders of IRGC is already not in the picture. And you can clearly see that Saudi Arabia started aggressively attacking the Houthis, and Iran is not supporting Houthis anymore. Even the Yemeni government is somewhat supporting Saudi Arabia in downsizing Houthis because the general people of Yemen doesn't like the Houthis. If you see the history of Houthis, they sort of captured the Yemeni population by force and butchered their own greater family members to keep power to themselves. Muslims like Houthis when they see that in Bab al-Mandeb, when Israel strikes Palestine, the American ships are not smoothly able to go through the straits. But if you look carefully to the history of Houthis, no Yemeni people will support the Houthis because Yemeni freedom is being captured by the Houthis. And Saudi Arabia won't tolerate a proxy group of Iran at such close proximity of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is aggressively going against Houthis. So all the Iranian proxies and IRGC is being downsized, number one. Number two is, you'll see that the US bases are being downsized, and the situation in the Middle East is that the Middle East believes that the US bases in the Middle East is a burden, not an asset. It's a liability. And number three, that Iran-USA war clearly flattened Israeli influence in the region. You can clearly see that the whole world is now united against Israel, not against Iran. Israel lost the narrative war, Israel lost the strategic partners, and we can clearly see that the US ambassadors and their government officials, including Marco Rubio, is clearly coming out and speaking against Israeli dominance and Israel trying to pushing USA towards a forever war. You can clearly see Donald Trump aggressively supporting and praising and admiring MBS, Erdogan, Qatar, and he is not praising Israel, where Israel is trying to push America towards a forever war with Iran. You can clearly see that all the three challenges that Saudi Arabia is trying to remove is getting removed gradually. And now go back to the first Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia when he was elected in 2024. And when he visited there, what did all the Saudi Arab Qatar, and UAE did. They committed more than $1.5 trillion to USA and their different companies and entities, a commitment that will only come true as the cooperation between US corporations and Saudi Arabia companies becoming meaningful for both parties. Meaning, Saudi Arabia and American corporations, Qatari sovereign welfare fund holders, and UAE welfare fund holders, all of them are sitting in a virtual table and deciding the future of Middle East, where there is cooperation. Nothing is happening by force. Rather, it is happening by the regional priorities, and the regional priorities are mainly set by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE. And in that plan and the way the aftermath of Iran-USA war is coming up, it is clear that Saudi Arabia now is increasing their influence in the Middle Eastern region. Also, when the US bases were struck by Iran, Saudi Arabia didn't go again to USA or UK for more arms. Rather, Saudi Arabia went in partnership with Pakistan, in partnership with Turkey, and with strategic alliance with China, which all indicates a greater Islamic NATO proposition. So Saudi Arabia is also calling for a unity in the Middle Eastern region, and Saudi Arabia's aggressive military cooperation with Turkey and Pakistan indicate that going forward, Saudi Arabia is more inclined towards military assistance from Turkey and Pakistan rather than from USA and Europe. That used to happen back in the days. Very recently, when all of the people were talking about the rift between Saudi Arabia and UAE, Saudi Arabia came up. They talked about their cooperation between Saudi Arabia and UAE. So Saudi Arabia is in a great shape for becoming the financial engine for the entire Middle East region. And as Saudi Arabia starts investing their trillions of dollars of sovereign welfare fund for their development, for themselves and for the whole region, they will become the financial engine that the entire Middle East region needs for rebuilding. Now let's talk about Iran. Iran now definitely post 1979, they are in economic sanction, they are struggling, their people are frustrated. At the same time, their people are resilient not to bow down to America. But you can clearly see that Iran is very careful when they talk about their partnership with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, and with Turkey, which indicates Iran also wants greater cooperation. Definitely, they have great cooperation with Pakistan and with China, that goes without saying. And Iran's government has already indicated that they are comfortable with the idea that their proxies no longer exist or downsized, and they prefer the opportunity to trade, export and import with the entire region. They are frustrated with the economic pressure that their country faces. Yes, they have great military industrial complex, but that military industrial complex comes with an unbelievable, unbearable economic cost. So if you look at the 14 points that Iran has signed, you will clearly see and understand that they want the $300 billion, they want their foreign accounts to be unfreezed, and they prefer that Iran goes towards an economic development rather than they keep fighting these endless proxy wars. And Iran can also realize that their existence and their presence in the influence is not ensuring Palestinian freedom. Rather, Iran's IRGC's contribution to the region is ensuring Israeli dominance. Whatever Hezbollah and Houthis did, it actually was counterproductive for the freedom of Palestinian people. Apparently, some can critique that Iran is the only country which is working for Palestinian freedom, but in hindsight, if you see, Iran is the reason for which Israel can justify their greater Israeli plan, the aggression of Israel to the whole world. The moment Iran moves towards economic sovereignty rather than military chaos that they are creating with their proxies, then the Israeli justification for expanding their military influence in the region will be null and void. So Iran is actively also choosing a cooperation with Turkey and Saudi Arabia and not destruction or chaos. And as the war is progressing between Iran and USA, Iran is gradually becoming more and more inclined towards Saudi Arabia and Turkey for cooperation. And if you look at the Ayatollah Khamenei's funeral, you can clearly see that the entire Middle Eastern region, including Saudi Arabia, was actively involved and participated in that symbolic funeral, which is significant for geopolitics and the Islamic NATO vision. Now let's talk about Pakistan, the country with the nuclear weapon. The Pakistan is seeing the opportunity that their military can cooperate in the Middle East aggressively. Pakistan is regularly in talks with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with Turkey for economic development. They want to sell their military support for all the economic baggage that Pakistan have over the years. And if you see post-Operation Sindoor, where Pakistan showed dominance against India, we can clearly see that Pakistan and their Field Marshal Asim Munir did a great job to uphold Pakistan image in the entire region. Pakistan has amazing relation with both Russia and with USA. It goes without saying that Pakistan and China relationship is empowering Pakistan's profile and Pakistan's security. So Pakistan has already become an alternative to the US bases that used to exist in the Middle Eastern region. Saudi Arabia is aggressively investing in Pakistan. Qatar is aggressively investing in Pakistan, and Pakistan sees the opportunity to get out of their economic struggles and play their key role in the new Middle Eastern region. Now, fifth, let's talk about Yemen. People are not aware of the power that Bab al-Mandeb Strait holds. This is Hormuz Strait. Now we know that the Hormuz Strait is more powerful than the nuclear weapons. You can have more than 5,000 nuclear weapons. Russia have them, USA have them, China have many. They don't say the number, they don't disclose the number. But the point is, you can't use them. But Iran already showed that they can effectively use the Strait of Hormuz when they need it. Yemen also have a choke point, and that is Bab al-Mandeb. Bab al-Mandeb is not as significant for oil routes like Hormuz, but Bab al-Mandeb is enough to disrupt the global supply chain. Now look at this. If Saudi Arabia and Iran comes to cooperation, and Saudi Arabia is controlling Yemen and removing the Houthis, then practically Saudi Arabia and Iran is controlling both Hormuz Strait and Bab al-Mandeb, which effectively controls more than 30% of the global energy trade routes. It can absolutely diminish the global supply chain. So when Saudi Arabia is removing Houthis from the picture, and Saudi Arabia is planning to invest, and Qatar is planning to invest in Iran, what will eventually end up happening is Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Iran will effectively control the policies of Yemen, which means both these critical straits will be controlled by these players and not by USA or not by UK or not by Israel. Many people argue that, oh, Muslims are not powerful, Middle Eastern countries are not powerful because they don't have the nuclear weapon. But what they have is more powerful and more usable than nuclear weapon, is that access or control of these two straits will be actively, the key of these two straits will be actively present to these countries and not to anyone else. If you remove all the American bases, and if you remove the Israeli dominance, if you remove all the chaos and unwanted wars, then you can clearly see to have control over these two straits is more powerful than having 5,000-10,000 nuclear warheads. And this is the future that we are heading. Yemeni people are fed up of Houthis, and Yemen is in a situation where they want more Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatari dominance in this region. They don't want the economic starvation that they are in. So where we are heading with this, Yemen will become a vassal state of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. So where is it heading? Yemen will gradually become a vassal state of Saudi Arabia. And this will mean that Saudi Arabia will have great control over Bab al-Mandeb. Now I use the word vassal state, and I want all the people to understand what is vassal state. Vassal state is a country whose military, economic, overall foreign policy is greatly influenced by a bigger player. So when there is a vassal state, it means that the country is semi-independent. They are not fully independent. So when I talk about Yemen and Egypt and Syria, these are all vassal states. There are big countries in the world which are actually vassal states. Why? Because there is a history and context. There is a foreign bigger power which actually controls their economy and their military. For example, India has a vassal state, and that is Bhutan. USA and UK had a lot of vassal states in the Middle East, but gradually these vassal states are changing their parent country. Yemen used to be divided. Half of Yemen used to be controlled by Saudi Arabia, half of it was used to controlled by Iran through the Houthis. When Yemen fully becomes a vassal state of Saudi Arabia, then Yemen's economy will significantly rise up, and their control in this Bab al-Mandeb will be shared with Saudi Arabia directly. That is good for Yemen's prosperity, and in the long run, Yemen can pursue further independence, but in the short run, they don't have a better solution than to remove Houthis with the support of Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's greater cooperation with Iran, for which we can clearly see when Saudi Arabia is aggressively going against the Houthis, Iran is not directly supporting the Houthis like the way they did 5-7 years back when there was a war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Sixth, let's talk about Syria. What happened in Syria is so significant for the freedom of Palestine. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad was the player who ensured the military aggression of Israel. How? Bashar al-Assad was directly there by the support of Iran and by the support of Russia, who wanted their base in Syria. Iran desperately wanted Bashar al-Assad there. But Bashar al-Assad was against its people, butchered its own citizens, and Syria was a failed state for years. Now, when Shara is in power and Bashar al-Assad is in Russia, who is controlling Syria? Syria is entirely controlled by Turkey and by Saudi Arabia. Their government funds, their military, their foreign policy, everything is controlled by Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Primarily Turkey, secondarily Saudi Arabia. So Syria is now a vassal state. From failed state to a vassal state is definitely a promotion. Israel is absolutely going nuts about the fact that Syria is controlled by Turkey, because Israel knows that as long as Bashar al-Assad was there, Syria was a failed state. It was easier and comfortable for Israel to increase and enhance their control in the Middle East. But in every small wars that took place around Syria, all of them was won by Syria against Israel. Whatever Israel is now trying to do or occupy in Syria is gradually being erased by Syria with the help of Turkey's military-industrial complex. So Syria is now more united than what they used to be 5 years back or 15 years back. And Israel is not happy with it. But as a Muslim, you need to understand how Syria is significant for the freedom of Palestine. You see, Turkey's influence in Syria clearly means Syria is more united, Syria is economically developing, Syria's Muslims are happier and more free to do what they want to do in their career and have a prosperous life. And eventually, when Syria's government employees are getting active funds from Saudi Arabia and Syria's military is getting active support in Turkey, which means that Syria is going to support the Palestine cause more than ever before. And Syria is historically a key part in the economic development of the entire region. Let's talk about Egypt. I request all of you to just look at the Egypt's octagon military industrial complex plan, which they are aggressively pursuing, and who's for it, who's against it. This 33 billion mega military industrial complex project is one of its kind in the history of Middle East. This is a major military expansion by Egypt. Who is supporting it? Aggressively, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Yemen is supporting the military industrial expansion plan by the Egypt government, General Sisi. Who is going crazy about it, opposing it? That is Israel. You have to look at the history first. Egypt, after the demise of Muslim Brotherhood supported President Morsi, when President General Sisi came to lead Egypt, Egypt was a vassal state of USA. Now there is a transition. Egypt's new parent is not USA anymore. It is Saudi Arabia and Turkey. US corporations are increasingly showing their comfort for a two-state solution between Palestine and Israel. It can be clearly understood that Egypt's military-industrial complex is not going to support Israeli expansion. Rather, it's going to support the Palestinian cause. One can say, but this is the government, General Sisi's government is the one who stood against Muslim Brotherhood's uprising. That is true. But it is also true that countries and their leadership and their policies change as the regional plan changes. You need to understand that Egypt is not a fully independent country. It is a vassal state. And the parent used to be USA. Now the parent is Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So their influence towards Egypt means that whatever the foreign policy that Turkey and Saudi Arabia has, Egypt will follow. For Egypt's own economic and military development, this Octagon project indicates a change, because in last 25 to 30 years, we have seen mostly that Egypt was kept limited. Its military influence was kept limited. What used to happen was, between 1970 to 2010, we have seen an Egypt which is not active for the Palestinian cause. But now, as we see that the Octagon military-industrial complex project is unfolding in front of our eyes, which is supported by Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Yemen, it clearly shows a change. And that change is Egypt's foreign policy will be aligned with the greater Muslim majority countries' foreign policy, and which means that this is where Israel is. If Turkey and Syria and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, all of them want a free Palestine, Israel doesn't have a choice but to accept it. If they don't want Israel to expand their military invasion, then Israel has no way out but to accept the greater regional plan. Especially when US bases are not in the picture, when US active military and economic support to Israel is reducing, we see a Palestine rising, Israel becoming more timid. So the rise of Islamic NATO is clear when you consider the 7 countries that I talked about and how they collectively are creating a new vision for the entire Middle East. Is China aligned with it? Absolutely. China is aggressively supporting the Palestinian cause and standing against the Israel cause. And China is very vocal about it. Is USA accepting the plan? Absolutely. Donald Trump's and Witkoff's reassurance to its Middle Eastern regional partners show that the American corporations side is clearly aligned with the vision of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. So all in all, what we are going to see is a new Middle East where the Islamic NATO, the cooperation between the major Islamic countries is not a dream but a reality.